The night air whispered against Kalen's window, carrying with it the familiar sounds of his isolated research station. The mechanical hum of equipment, the occasional ping of notifications on his systems, and the steady rhythm of his own breathing. These were the only sounds that had accompanied him for months. His small living quarters, nestled within the sprawling technological complex, felt more like a cocoon than a prison. At least, that's what he told himself. Kalen's fingers danced across the holographic interface, hovering above his desk, the blue light casting sharp shadows across his angular face. The simulation was running smoothly. His latest project on atmospheric reclamation showed promising results. If his calculations were correct, the new filtration system could increase efficiency by 23%. Not revolutionary, but progress nonetheless. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. The digital clock on his desk read 23:47. Another late night, but time had little meaning here. Days blended into weeks, and weeks into months with alarming ease. His isolation was self-imposed, a choice made after the collapse of his academic career and personal relationships. The research station, located on the outskirts of New Meridian City, offered him solitude and purpose. The company that owned it was content with his occasional breakthroughs and didn't ask questions about his reclusive lifestyle. The window beside his desk overlooked a rugged landscape, a mix of weathered concrete structures from the old industrial era and the encroaching wilderness that had reclaimed much of the area after the climate shift. It was neither beautiful nor entirely desolate. It simply existed, much like Kalen himself. He reached for his mug, grimacing as he took a sip of the now-cold synthetic coffee. The bitter taste lingered as he turned back to his work. That's when he first heard it, a sound that didn't belong. A soft thump against the exterior wall. Kalen paused, his hand hovering over the interface. The research station creaked and groaned with regularity, the metal expanding and contracting with temperature changes, the wind whistling through the external vents. This was different, deliberate, almost like something had landed. He dismissed the thought. Wildlife was scarce in this region, and larger animals had long since migrated to the protected zones. Perhaps debris carried by the wind. He returned to his calculations. Then came the breathing. At first, it was so faint that Kalen thought it might be a malfunction in the ventilation system. A rhythmic, raspy sound just outside his window. Heavy, labored, unmistakably organic. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. He slowly turned toward the window, half expecting to see nothing but the darkness beyond. The exterior lights had dimmed automatically hours ago, an energy-saving measure that suddenly seemed like a terrible design choice. The window revealed only his own reflection, pale and wide-eyed, against the backdrop of night. But the breathing continued. In, out, each exhale slightly more strained than the last. System, exterior lights to full, Kalen commanded, his voice cracking slightly. The area outside his window flooded with harsh white light. Nothing, just the empty landing platform that extended from his living quarters, the metal railing that surrounded it, and beyond that, the drop to the lower levels of the station. The breathing had stopped. Kalen approached the window cautiously. Had he imagined it? Weeks of minimal human contact could do strange things to the mind. He pressed his palm against the transparent material, a composite far stronger than traditional glass, and peered into the shadows that persisted despite the lighting. System, run exterior diagnostic. Check for anomalies. Running diagnostic, the AI responded in its flat, feminine voice. No anomalies detected. All systems functioning within normal parameters. Kalen frowned. Check again. Focus on exterior section E7. His window designation. Section 7 shows no anomalies. Pressure normal. No breaches detected. Temperature consistent with external environment. He stepped back from the window, suddenly feeling foolish. The isolation was getting to him. Perhaps it was time to schedule a supply run to the city, interact with actual humans for a change. His eyes fell on the small orange pill container on his nightstand. Or maybe he just needed to adjust his medication. As he turned away, A shadow passed over the light, streaming through his window. Quick, massive, and unmistakable. Kalen spun around just in time to see something large disappear upward beyond his line of sight. His heart hammered against his ribs. System, access exterior cameras. Show me roof section above E7. Camera access denied. Insufficient clearance. What? Override. Security protocol, Kalen Theta 9. Override rejected. Camera access requires level alpha. Clearance. That made no sense. He had designed half the security protocols for this station himself. Unless someone had altered his access. But why would they restrict the exterior cameras? The breathing returned, now from above. Heavier, closer, accompanied by a soft scratching sound, like claws against metal. Kalen backed away from the window, his mind racing through possibilities, each more unlikely than the last. A maintenance drone malfunctioning? A wild animal that had somehow adapted to the post-shift environment? Or, and this thought chilled him, a security breach of a more intentional nature? He grabbed his tablet from the desk and quickly accessed the station's limited medical database. If there was a life form out there, it might register on the thermal scanners. The display flickered as it loaded the data, and Kalen's breath caught in his throat. There, on the roof directly above his quarters, was a heat signature. Large, abnormally hot, and definitely alive. The shape was vaguely humanoid, but distorted. Extended appendages spread from the central mass in a configuration that matched no animal he knew. The breathing stopped abruptly. The heat signature shifted, moving toward the edge of the roof. Kalen's eyes darted to the window, just as a dark shape descended into view. And there it was, perched on the railing of his external platform, illuminated by the harsh lights. Not human, not animal, something in between. A face that was almost woman-like. High cheekbones, full lips, eyes that reflected the light with an amber glow. But the similarities to humanity ended there. Her skin was a deep bronze that seemed to shimmer with an iridescence that shifted as she moved. Instead of hair, feathered crests extended from her skull and down her spine. Where human arms would be, powerful wings extended, the membranes between the elongated digits a deep crimson that faded to black at the edges. Her lower body was muscular, ending in taloned feet that gripped the railing with frightening strength. And she was looking directly at him. Kalen couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The creature, the woman, tilted her head slightly, studying him with an intensity that felt almost physical. Her chest heaved with those same heavy breaths he'd been hearing, the movement revealing more avian-like features, a sternum that protruded slightly, ridges along her collarbone that might have been vestigial feathers. They stared at each other for what felt like an eternity, separated only by the window between them. Then, slowly, deliberately, she raised one wing hand, extending what might have been a finger toward the window. Toward him. Kalen's instinct for self-preservation finally kicked in. He stumbled backward, nearly tripping over his chair. System. Lock down all exterior access points. Security alert. The lights in his quarters flashed red as the system responded to the command. Metal shutters began to descend over his window. The last thing Kalen saw before the barrier sealed was the creature's expression. Not anger or aggression, but something that looked unsettlingly like disappointment. The breathing was gone, replaced by the blaring of security alarms and the mechanical voice of the system requesting that he verify the nature of the threat. Kalen sank to the floor, his back against the wall, heart pounding, mind reeling. What had he just seen? And more importantly, what did it want from him? 3 nights had passed since the encounter, and Kalen had barely slept. The first night, he'd sealed himself in his quarters, jumping at every sound, convinced that the creature would find a way to breach the station's defenses. By the second day, when no alarms had triggered and the system reported no anomalies, rationality began to reassert itself. He'd spent hours searching through the station's databases for any information about genetically modified organisms, evolutionary adaptations to the shift, or even folklore that might explain what he'd seen. The results were disappointingly sparse. A few references to abandoned experiments from before the collapse of the old governments, unsubstantiated reports of chimeras in the wasteland territories, nothing concrete. By the third night, scientific curiosity had begun to overcome fear. Kalen found himself standing before the window, finger hovering over the control that would raise the security shutter. The rational part of his brain screamed that this was madness, that whatever was out there was dangerous, unknown. But another part, a part that had been dormant during his years of isolation, wanted to know more. He pressed the button. The shutter retracted with a mechanical whir, revealing the night beyond. Kalen had adjusted the exterior lighting to a dimmer setting, bright enough to see by, but not the harsh glare that might repel a visitor. He didn't analyze too closely why he might want the visitor to return. For an hour, nothing happened. Kalen sat at his desk, pretended to work on his research while his eyes constantly flicked to the window. The night remained still and silent. Eventually, disappointment settled in his chest, a feeling he hadn't expected. He was about to close the shutter again when he saw it. A flicker of movement at the edge of the light's reach. She was back, but more cautious this time. The winged figure hovered at the periphery of visibility, her powerful wings beating occasionally to maintain position. She was watching him, head tilted in that same curious manner. Kalen slowly stood, careful not to make any sudden movements. His heart raced, but not entirely from fear now. He approached the window, stopping a few feet away. "Hello," he said, feeling immediately foolish. There was no way his voice could carry through the soundproofed window, and even if it could, there was no reason to believe this creature would understand human language. To his surprise, she moved closer, her wings creating powerful downdrafts that stirred the dust on the platform. She alighted on the railing again, this time folding her wings slightly to make herself appear smaller, less threatening. The heavy breathing he'd first noticed was still there, but now Kalen could see the reason, a dark discoloration on her side, just below where the wing joined what would be a shoulder on human. "An injury. You're hurt," Kalen murmured, forgetting again that she couldn't hear him. The creature shifted, wincing visibly as the movement disturbed her wound. Her eyes never left his. There was intelligence there, undeniable, piercing intelligence. This was no animal. Making a decision he wasn't entirely sure was wise, Kalen moved to his small kitchenette. He filled a bowl with water and grabbed a packaged nutrient bar, bland but packed with calories and proteins. He hesitated, then added a second bar before returning to the window. The exterior platform had a small access hatch for maintenance purposes. It could be opened from inside without compromising the main security systems. Kalen placed his offerings beside the hatch, then slowly opened it, just wide enough to slide the items through. The winged woman watched this process with evident caution, her body tensing as the hatch opened. Kalen pushed the water and food onto the platform, then quickly closed the hatch and stepped back from the window. She didn't move immediately. Her gaze shifted between Kalen and the offerings, calculation clear in her eyes. Finally, with movements that spoke of both pain and wariness, she descended from the railing and approached the items. Her wings partially folded against her back, but remained ready to extend at a moment's notice. She examined the water first, dipping one clawed digit into it before bringing it to her nose. Then, with surprising grace for one so injured, she lifted the bowl and drank deeply, her throat working as she swallowed. Water spilled down her chin and neck, catching the light like jewels against her iridescent skin. The nutrient bars were next. She sniffed them cautiously, then used her teeth and wing claws to tear open the packaging. Kalen was fascinated by the dexterity she displayed despite the apparent alienness of her appendages. She devoured the first bar quickly, then the second, with the efficiency of one who doesn't know when their next meal will come. When she finished, she looked up at Kalen again. Something had changed in her expression, a slight softening around her eyes, a less aggressive set to her shoulders despite the pain she must be feeling. She approached the window, closer than she had come before, and pressed one wing hand against the transparent barrier. Kalen felt a pull toward her that defied explanation. Slowly, hesitantly, he raised his own hand and placed it against the window, mirroring her gesture. Their hands, so different in form, aligned on opposite sides of the barrier. For a brief moment, Kalen had the strange sensation that he could feel warmth through the composite material, though he knew that was impossible. The moment was broken by a distant sound, a mechanical whirring that Kalen recognized as a security drone on its regular patrol route. The winged woman heard it too, her head snapping in the direction of the noise. Before Kalen could react, she had launched herself from the platform, wings extending to their full, impressive span, and disappeared into the darkness. Kalen stood at the window long after she'd gone, his hands still pressed against the glass. The bowl and wrappers remained on the platform, the only evidence that the encounter hadn't been a hallucination. He finally moved away, his mind racing with questions, but also with an unfamiliar sensation. For the first time in years, Kalen didn't feel completely alone. The next morning, Kalen woke early after a night of fitful sleep filled with dreams of flight. He immediately checked the platform outside his window. The bowl and wrappers were gone. Had she returned while he slept? Or had the wind simply carried them away? He opened his secure messaging program and hesitated. What he was considering might be unwise, but he needed more information, and there was only one person he could think of who might provide it without immediately reporting him to the authorities. Kalen typed a carefully worded message. *Galera, I hope this finds you well. It's been too long. I've encountered something unusual in my research that might interest you. Nothing dangerous, but certainly unexpected. If you have time, I'd appreciate your insight. As always, discretion is valued. *. He hesitated over the send button, then added, *P.S. Have you come across any references to avian-human hybridization in your work? Purely theoretical, of course, *. Kalen sent the message before he could reconsider. Alara had been a colleague before his self-imposed exile. Brilliant, but with a reputation for unorthodox interests. More importantly, she had connections in circles that didn't necessarily align with official research channels. While waiting for a response, Kalen returned to his regular work. The atmospheric reclamation project demanded attention, and the company expected results. But his focus kept drifting to the window and the memory of Amber Eyes. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Kalen prepared. He set out more water, this time adding a small amount of an electrolyte solution that might help with recovery. Instead of nutrient bars, he prepared a simple meal: synthesized protein cubes, engineered fruit, and a carbohydrate paste. Not appetizing by human standards, but nutritionally complete. He also gathered basic medical supplies: antiseptic, bandages, a small portable scanner for diagnosing injuries. He wasn't sure if human medicine would work on her, but it was better than nothing. As darkness fell, Kalen dimmed the interior lights of his quarters and opened the shutters. The platform was empty, but he was patient. He sat at his desk, pretending to work while keeping the window in his peripheral vision. His message alert chimed, startling him. Alara had responded. Kalen, what a surprise. I'd begun to think you'd vanished entirely. Unusual. Coming from you must be truly remarkable. As for your postscript, interesting timing. There have been whispers, and I emphasize whispers, about something called Project Ascendant from before the shift. Supposedly genetic experimentation with avian integration, but all records were thought destroyed. Until recently, when similar rumors began circulating in certain networks. Sightings in the wastelands. Officially denied, of course, If, hypothetically, you've encountered something relevant, be extremely careful. Some people in very high places are very interested in these rumors. Not all of them with benevolent intentions. Whatever you do, don't file any official reports, Stay safe, my friend. And next time, don't wait years to reach out, Kalen read the message twice, a chill settling in his stomach. Project Ascendant. It wasn't much, but it was a start, confirmation that what he'd seen might not be unique and that others knew of its existence. The warning about official reports concerned him. Who was looking for these beings? And why? A soft thump on the platform pulled him from his thoughts. She had returned, landing more gracefully this time, despite her injury. Kaylin noticed she carried something, a small object clutched in one wing claw. She placed it carefully beside the food and water he'd left out, then stepped back, watching the window expectantly. Kaylin approached slowly. The object glinted in the light, metal of some kind, but he couldn't make out details from this distance. He opened the maintenance hatch, wider this time, and reached through to retrieve it. It was a medallion of some sort, tarnished but still beautiful. Geometric patterns etched around the edge surrounded a central emblem, a stylized wing. The craftsmanship was intricate, definitely human-made. When Kaylin looked up, the winged woman had moved closer. She gestured to the medallion, then to herself, her movements deliberate. A message. This belongs to me. Or perhaps, this represents me. Thank you, Kaylin said, knowing she couldn't hear, but hoping his expression conveyed gratitude. He studied the medallion more closely. Tiny engraving along the inner edge caught his attention. Letters and numbers, partially worn away. PRGSC 7L. Project Ascendant. Kaylin's eyes widened as he made the connection. He looked at her with newfound understanding. You're one of them. From Project Ascendant. She tilted her head, watching his lips as he spoke, frustration evident in her expression. Communication was a barrier they hadn't yet overcome. An idea struck him. Kaylin held up one finger in a wait gesture, then hurried to his desk. He returned with his tablet, quickly opened a drawing program, and sketched a crude but recognizable winged figure. Beside it, he wrote Project Ascendant in large letters. He held the tablet to the window. Her reaction was immediate and visceral. Her eyes widened, and she took a step back, wings half extending in what might have been an instinctive defensive posture. Then, with trembling digits, she pointed to the words, then to herself, and nodded. Kaylin felt a surge of excitement, mixed with concern. He was right, but what did that mean for her? For him? He quickly erased the screen and wrote a new question. Name? She stared at the word, her brow furrowing in concentration. Communication was clearly difficult for her, but there was no doubt she could read. After a moment, she made a series of gestures that Kaylin couldn't interpret, then huffed in frustration. She pointed urgently at his tablet. Understanding, Kaylin opened the maintenance hatch and carefully slid the tablet through. She took it with surprising gentleness, her clawed digits navigating the screen with precision. When she returned it, a single word was written there. Lyra. Lyra, Kaylin repeated, looking at her with a smile. My name is Kaylin. He wrote it below hers. When she saw it, her lips moved, attempting to form the syllables without sound. The result was a wordless exhalation, but Kaylin appreciated the effort. It was another confirmation of her intelligence, her humanity, despite her alien appearance. Kaylin pointed to her injured side, then to the medical supplies he'd gathered. He mimed treating a wound, then raised his eyebrows in question. Lyra's response was hesitant. She looked at the supplies, then at Kaylin, indecision clear in her posture. Trust didn't come easily to her. Understandably so, if what Alara had implied about people hunting her kind was true. To Kaylin's surprise, she made her decision. She nodded once, decisively, and gestured toward the main door of his quarters, the one that led to the external platform. Kaylin felt a moment of panic. Opening that door would mean letting her inside, removing the barrier between them. It was one thing to communicate through a window, another entirely to be in the same space with her. What if his assessment was wrong? What if the intelligence he perceived was merely clever mimicry? What if she was dangerous? But as he looked at her, wounded, hungry, yet offering trust despite obvious risks, Kaylin knew what he had to do. He nodded and moved toward the door controls. System, unlock exterior door E7. Authorization, Kaylin Theta 9. Warning, exterior door unlock will compromise station security protocols. Confirm command. Kaylin hesitated for only a moment. Confirm. The door slid open with a hydraulic hiss. Cold night air rushed in, carrying the scent of metal and ozone that characterized the wasteland. Lyra stood just outside, her wings partially extended for balance, or perhaps quick escape if needed. Close up, she was even more remarkable, larger than he'd estimated, standing nearly 7 feet tall with her unusual posture. The iridescence of her skin shifted in complex patterns that might have been involuntary expressions of emotion. Her breathing was labored, the wound on her side clearly causing significant pain. Now that there was no barrier between them, Kaelin could smell a faint, unfamiliar scent from her, not unpleasant, but alien, like petrichor mixed with something spicy. "Please come in," Kaelin said, stepping back to give her space. "I want to help." Whether she understood his words or just his tone, Lyra nodded and cautiously entered. Her taloned feet clicked against the composite flooring as she moved, her gaze darting around the small living space, assessing it with the wariness of a hunted creature. Kaelin gestured toward a chair, but she ignored it, choosing instead to crouch in the open area near the center of the room. A more defensible position, he realized. She could see both the door and the window from there. Approaching slowly, medical supplies in hand, Kaelin knelt a few feet away from her. "I need to see your injury," he said, pointing to her side. Lyra watched him for a moment, then carefully shifted her wing to reveal the wound. Kaelin sucked in a breath. It was worse than he'd thought, a long, jagged cut that appeared to have been made by something sharp and mechanical. The edges were cauterized, suggesting energy weapon damage. Someone had attacked her with advanced technology. "This will sting," Kaelin warned, opening the antiseptic. He mimicked pain, then relief, hoping she would understand. Lyra nodded grimly and braced herself. As Kaelin carefully cleaned the wound, she remained stoically silent, though the tension in her body revealed her discomfort. The injury was severe but clean, no sign of infection, which was fortunate. Her physiology might be different enough that human pathogens weren't compatible, or perhaps she simply had enhanced healing abilities. As he worked, Kaelin spoke softly, a steady stream of reassurance and explanation that he knew she couldn't fully understand, but hoped might comfort through tone alone. "This looks like a glancing hit from a pulse rifle, military grade. You're lucky it wasn't a direct hit. Who did this to you? Are there others like you? How long have you been out there alone?" Lyra watched his face as he spoke, her amber eyes tracking the movement of his lips. When he finished applying a synthetic skin graft over the wound, she reached out hesitantly and touched his hand, a gesture of gratitude that transcended the need for words. The contact sent an unexpected warmth through Kaelin. Her skin was warmer than human normal, textured like the finest suede. The simple touch conveyed more than words could have. Trust, vulnerability, connection. Kaelin found himself smiling at her, a genuine expression that felt unfamiliar on his face after so many months of isolation. He gathered the medical supplies and stood, gesturing toward the food and water he'd prepared. "You should eat, regain your strength." Lyra followed his gaze and nodded, moving with more ease now that her wound was treated. She consumed the meal with the same efficiency as before, but with less desperate haste. When she finished, she looked around the room more carefully, her gaze lingering on his workstation, the books on his shelf, the few personal items he'd brought to the station. While she explored visually, Kaelin returned to his tablet and opened a new document. If they were going to communicate properly, they needed more than gestures. He began creating a simple pictorial system, basic symbols for concepts like danger, safety, food, rest. He added more specific images, a winged figure representing Lyra, a human figure for himself, a building for the station. When he showed it to her, Lyra's eyes lit with understanding. She took the tablet and studied it intently, then pointed to the danger symbol and drew something new, a geometric shape that Kaelin recognized with a chill. The corporate logo of Nexus Security, one of the largest private military contractors that had filled the power vacuum after the shift. "Nexus is hunting you?" he asked, pointing between the danger symbol and the logo she'd drawn. Lyra nodded emphatically. She added more to the drawing, multiple winged figures, like herself but with variations. Then, with disturbing precision, she drew the same figures lying broken, captured, caged. The message was clear. She wasn't the only one of her kind, but the others had been captured or killed by Nexus Security. The implications were staggering. A private military corporation hunting down what appeared to be genetically modified humans from a pre-shift project. Why? What value could Lyra and her kind hold that would justify such a pursuit? As if reading his thoughts, Lyra added one more element to the drawing. She sketched a simple representation of DNA, then pointed to herself and drew an arrow linking the two. She tapped the DNA drawing repeatedly, her expression intense. Your DNA? They want your genetic material. Kaelin guessed. Lyra nodded, then mimicked an injection motion, followed by gesturing to her wings and then to a human figure. Kaelin felt sick as understanding dawned. They want to replicate the modifications. Make more like you, but under their control. Lyra's solemn nod confirmed his suspicion. Suddenly, the pieces clicked into place. The restricted access to exterior cameras. The increased security drone patrols that he dismissed as routine. The company that owned this research station, a subsidiary of Nexus Security. Kaelin wasn't just an isolated researcher. He was unwittingly part of their surveillance network. And now he had invited one of their targets into his home. We need to be careful, he said, pointing to the danger symbol and then to the station around them. Not safe here. Not for long. Lyra's expression showed she understood all too well. She pointed to the window, then to herself, and made a flying motion, followed by pointing to Kaelin with a questioning tilt of her head. No, I can't go with you, Kaelin responded, shaking his head. I wouldn't survive out there. She frowned, clearly frustrated by the communication barrier. She took the tablet again and drew a crude map. The station, the wasteland beyond, and far to the east, a cluster of shapes that might represent mountains or structures. Kaelin leaned closer. Is that where you're going? A safe place. Lyra nodded, then pointed to the station again and made a slashing motion across her throat. A universal gesture for danger or death. Kaelin's heart raced. You think they'll come here? Looking for you. Another nod. More urgent this time. The implications were clear. By helping Lyra, Kaelin had put himself in danger. If Nexus discovered he had treated her, sheltered her, the consequences would be severe. But he couldn't bring himself to regret his actions. Looking at Lyra, seeing the intelligence and emotion in her eyes, he knew he couldn't have done otherwise. You should rest, he said, pointing to the wound he'd treated and miming sleep. Stay here tonight. We'll figure out what to do in the morning. Lyra seemed to understand. She glanced toward the small, sleeping alcove, then back at Kaelin with uncertainty. Take the bed, he insisted, gesturing toward it. I'll stay up, keep watch. She hesitated, then moved toward the alcove, her movements betraying exhaustion now that the immediate danger had passed. She didn't lie down immediately, instead perching on the edge of the bed, wings partially folded behind her. Her posture remained vigilant, even as fatigue clouded her eyes. Kaelin returned to his workstation, but kept the surveillance feeds active on his secondary screen. If Nexus was monitoring his station, he needed to be prepared. He also composed a carefully worded message to Alara. *re, our theoretical discussion. If one were to hypothetically help such a being, what resources might be needed for long-term survival? Asking for a fictional character in a story I'm writing, *. As he waited for a response, Kaelin glanced toward the sleeping alcove. Lyra had finally succumbed to exhaustion, her large frame curled on his bed in a position that accommodated her wings. Even in sleep, there was a tension to her body, as if part of her remained alert for danger. Kaelin felt a surge of protectiveness that surprised him with its intensity. Whatever Lyra was, experiment, hybrid, evolutionary marvel, she was also a person. Intelligent, capable of fear and gratitude, of trust and sacrifice. She deserved better than to be hunted like an animal for her genetic material. And in that moment, looking at her sleeping form, Kaelin made a decision that would change both their lives forever. He would help her escape, whatever it took. Kaelin woke with a start, disoriented. He'd fallen asleep at his workstation despite his intention to keep watch. The chronometer showed 5:47, early morning. He glanced quickly toward the sleeping alcove, relieved to see Lyra still there, now sitting upright, watching him with those intelligent amber eyes. "Good morning," he said automatically, rubbing the stiffness from his neck. Lyra tilted her head in what he'd come to recognize as her gesture of acknowledgement. She looked better this morning. The wound treatment appeared to be working, and rest had restored some of her energy. She gestured toward the workstation screen, where a message notification blinked. Alara had responded to his query. Asterisk, your fictional character would need medical supplies, regenerative patches, broad-spectrum antibiotics, high-calorie food, protein concentrate, specifically in a way to avoid thermal detection. Nexus's hunter drones use heat signatures as primary tracking. There's a compound called thermblock that temporarily masks body heat, used by wasteland runners. As for safe havens, there are rumors of a settlement in the eastern reaches of the Dead Peaks. Old mining complex, now home to various undesirables the Corps would rather forget. Supposedly, they don't ask questions about what you are, only what you can contribute. Asterisk. Asterisk, on a completely unrelated note, my security clearance just got flagged for review. Watch yourself, Kalen. Whatever story you're writing, I recommend finishing it quickly and deleting the draft. Communication blackout is advisable. Asterisk. Be safe. Kalen's stomach tightened with anxiety. If Alara's clearance was flagged, it meant their communications were being monitored. Nexus might already be aware that something unusual was happening at his station. They needed to move quickly. "We need to go," he told Lyra, pointing to the map she had drawn the night before. "Today." She nodded, seemingly unsurprised by the urgency. She pointed to Kalen, then to herself, her expression questioning. "Yes, I'm coming with you," he confirmed. The decision had crystallized overnight. Staying meant capture, interrogation, and likely worse for both of them. Besides, he realized with sudden clarity there was nothing left for him here. Just isolation and a life half-lived. Kalen moved quickly around his quarters, gathering essential supplies. His emergency pack already contained basic survival gear, water purification, thermal blanket, multi-tool. To this, he added the medical supplies Lyra would need, extra nutrient bars, and his tablet loaded with maps and reference materials. He dressed in his field gear, designed for the harsh environment outside the station's protective barriers. Lyra watched him with what seemed like approval, occasionally pointing to items he might have overlooked. Their wordless communication was becoming more fluid with practice. As Kalen worked, he accessed the station's systems one last time. If they were going to escape, they needed a distraction, something to occupy the security drones while they fled. System, initiate atmospheric simulation protocol 7. Authorization. Kalen Thade 9. Schedule execution for 6:30. Warning. Protocol 7 requires evacuation of sections A through D due to hazardous testing conditions. Confirm command. Confirm. Emergency simulation drill. The system accepted the command. Protocol 7 would flood sections of the station with harmless but opaque gas, triggering multiple alarms and deploying security resources to contain the emergency. It should buy them enough time to reach the edge of the drone patrol perimeter. "We leave in 20 minutes, Kalen told Lyra, holding up fingers to indicate the time. She nodded, then approached him with unexpected grace. From a hidden pocket or fold in her wing membrane, she withdrew something, a small vial containing a silvery liquid. She offered it to Kalen. He took it cautiously. "What is this?" Lyra mimed rubbing it on her skin, then pointed to the thermal scanner on his desk and made a vanishing gesture. Thermblock, Kalen realized. She had her own supply of the thermal masking compound Alara had mentioned. As 6:30 approached, they made final preparations. Kalen applied the thermblock to his exposed skin. It felt cold initially, then faded to a tingling numbness. Lyra did the same, her movements efficient and practiced. The backpack was a challenge. It wouldn't fit comfortably with her wings. Eventually, they modified it to hang across her chest instead, distributing the weight so it wouldn't impede her flight. System, exterior status? Kaylin asked, making one final check. Exterior conditions. Temperature 12.3 degrees Celsius. Wind from northeast at 6 kilometers per hour. Air quality index moderate. No precipitation detected. Security drones on scheduled patrol paths. An interior systems nominal. Atmospheric simulation protocol 7 scheduled to initiate in 2 minutes. Kaylin looked at Lyra. Ready. She met his gaze steadily and nodded once. Then, to his surprise, she extended her hand, a deliberately human gesture of solidarity and trust. Kaylin took it, feeling the strange texture of her skin, the inhuman strength in her grip. At exactly 6:30, the alarms began. Red emergency lights flashed throughout the station as the atmospheric simulation protocol activated, releasing the harmless but visually dramatic gas into the designated sections. Through the window, Kaylin could see security drones already diverting from their patrol routes, heading toward the affected areas. Now, he said, moving toward the door. System, emergency evacuation protocol. Open exterior door, E7. The door slid open without question, emergency protocols overriding security concerns. Cold morning air rushed in, carrying the acrid scent of the wasteland. They moved quickly onto the platform. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten with dawn, providing enough visibility to navigate, but still dark enough to offer some cover. Below and around them, the station was in controlled chaos. Lights flashing, drones moving rapidly between sections, automated warnings blaring from exterior speakers. Lyra crouched slightly, extending her wings to their full impressive span. She looked at Kaylin and gestured for him to come closer. "You want me to hold on to you?" he asked, suddenly understanding her plan. She nodded emphatically. It was the only way. He couldn't cross the wasteland on foot quickly enough to escape detection, and they had no other transportation. Kaylin hesitated only briefly before moving into her embrace. Lyra positioned him against her front, her powerful arms wrapping around his torso securely. Her wings extended fully on either side of them, the membranes catching the early morning light with a dark crimson glow. "I hope you know what you're doing," Kaylin muttered, trying to ignore the hammering of his heart. Lyra made a sound then, the first vocalization he'd heard from her, something between a chirp and a laugh, suggesting that yes, she very much knew what she was doing. Before Kaylin could reconsider, Lyra launched them from the platform. His stomach lurched as they dropped several meters before her wings caught the air, arresting their fall and converting it to forward momentum. The sensation was nothing like the smooth ascent of a hover vehicle. It was wild, organic, primal. They rose rapidly, each powerful beat of Lyra's wings carrying them higher above the station. Kaylin clung to her, his face pressed against her chest, feeling the rapid rhythm of her heart and the expansion of her lungs with each breath. Despite her injury, she flew with impressive strength and control. Below them, the research station grew smaller, its precise geometric shapes contrasting with the chaotic wasteland terrain surrounding it. In the distance, Kaylin could see the sprawl of New Meridian City, all gleaming towers and artificial light, a bastion of technological civilization amidst the ruins of the old world. They were flying away from it, toward the east and the jagged silhouette of the mountains that locals called the Dead Peaks. Beyond those lay only rumors and wasteland legends, the territories that even Nexus didn't fully control. A sudden change in Lyra's flight pattern made Kaylin look back. 3 security drones had broken away from the station and were now moving in their direction. Fast, angular shapes cutting through the dawn light. "They've spotted us," he shouted over the rush of wind. Lyra chirped in acknowledgement and banked sharply, dropping lower to use the terrain for cover. Her flying became more erratic, quick changes in altitude and direction designed to confuse pursuit. Each maneuver pressed Kaylin against her with disorienting force, but her grip never faltered. The drones were gaining nevertheless. They weren't equipped with weapons. Research station security wasn't military grade, but they could track and report their position, bringing more dangerous pursuers. Lyra suddenly dove toward a massive tangle of ancient infrastructure, the remnants of a pre-shift transportation nexus, now a labyrinth of collapsed concrete and twisted metal. She navigated the maze with astonishing precision, weaving between fallen columns and ducking under partially collapsed archways. The drones followed, but with markedly less agility, their programmed caution forcing them to take wider paths. Emerging from the ruins, Lyra immediately banked toward a narrow canyon that cut through the foothills leading to the dead peaks. This was beyond the area Kaelin was familiar with, true wasteland territory. The canyon walls rose on either side of them, layered stone in shades of rust and amber. The wind channeled through the narrow space created powerful updrafts that Lyra used to her advantage, soaring higher with minimal effort. Kaelin chanced another look back. Only one drone remained in pursuit, the others presumably lost or damaged in the ruins. Even this last follower was falling behind, reaching the limits of its operational range. As they emerged from the canyon into a broader valley, the drone finally turned back, programmed to return to base rather than risk loss in the wasteland. The immediate danger had passed, but Kaelin harbored no illusions. This was just the beginning. Nexus would send more capable hunters once they realized what had happened. Lyra flew on, her breathing becoming more labored, but her determination unwavering. The landscape below them changed gradually, the sterile wasteland giving way to hardy vegetation as they gained altitude. Scraggly trees appeared in sheltered valleys, streams glinted in the growing daylight, and once, Kaelin spotted a herd of what might have been genetically adapted deer moving through a meadow. The world beyond the city and research stations wasn't as dead as corporate propaganda claimed. It was recovering, evolving, finding new equilibrium after the shift. By midday, even Lyra's impressive stamina was flagging. Her flight became less smooth, each wing beat more effortful. Kaelin could feel the strain in her body, the heat radiating from overworked muscles. "We need to rest," he called to her, gesturing toward a sheltered area beside a small lake nestled between two ridges. Lyra didn't argue, angling their descent toward the indicated spot. Their landing was less graceful than their takeoff, a controlled fall more than a proper alighting, but they reached the ground safely. Lyra immediately folded her wings, the membranes quivering with exhaustion, and sank to her knees. Kaelin quickly retrieved water and a protein bar from his pack, offering them to her before taking care of his own needs. As she ate and drank, he checked her wound. The synthetic skin graft was holding, but the area around it was inflamed. The strain of carrying him had aggravated the injury. "We'll rest here for a few hours," he told her, applying a cooling gel to the inflammation. "You've done enough. More than enough." Lyra nodded gratefully, her amber eyes holding his for a moment longer than necessary. There was something in that gaze, a warmth that transcended their differences, a connection that defied explanation. Kaelin felt it too, this strange bond forged through danger and mutual dependence. They made a simple camp in the shelter of a rock outcropping, using Kaelin's thermal blanket to create a small covered space protected from view. Lyra insisted on taking the first watch despite her fatigue, positioning herself where she could observe both the sky and the approaches to their hideaway. Kaelin didn't argue. Her senses were clearly sharper than his, her instincts honed by survival in a world that hunted her. Instead, he used the time to study his maps, plotting their course toward the rumored sanctuary in the Dead Peaks. If Alara's information was correct, they still had at least 2 days of travel ahead, challenging terrain through areas that might harbor dangers beyond Nexus's reach. As he worked, Kaelin found his gaze repeatedly drawn to Lyra. In repose, with the warm afternoon, light softening her features, the alienness of her appearance seemed less pronounced. There was a strange beauty to her, not despite her differences from humanity, but because of them. The iridescent patterns on her skin shifted subtly with her breathing, her feathered crest occasionally fluttering in response to sounds too faint for Kaelin to detect. She was a marvel of adaptation, Whether engineered or evolved, it hardly mattered. A being at once familiar and utterly unique. And she had trusted him, a stranger, with her life. Kaylin vowed silently that her trust would not be misplaced. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. As the day waned toward evening, clouds gathered over the mountains, promising rain. Lyra chirped softly, drawing Kaylin's attention to the darkening sky. "We should find better shelter," he agreed, beginning to pack up their meager camp. Lyra rose, stretching her wings cautiously. She seemed recovered somewhat, though Kaylin noted she still favored her injured side. She gestured toward a densely wooded area about a kilometer distant, then mimicked sleep. "Yes, that looks like good cover for the night," Kaylin nodded. They traveled on foot, moving carefully through the underbrush. Lyra's gait on land was unusual, a graceful but alien movement that accommodated her different musculature and the weight of her wings. Despite this, she moved with surprising silence, often pausing to listen or scent the air in a manner reminiscent of a predator. The forested area proved to be an old-growth oasis, somehow spared the worst effects of the shift. Ancient trees rose in cathedral-like columns, their canopy creating a sheltered world beneath. The ground was carpeted with moss and ferns, with the occasional luminescent fungus providing ghostly illumination in the deepening twilight. They found a natural hollow formed by the massive roots of a fallen giant, its space large enough to accommodate them both and sheltered from the elements. Just as they finished creating a simple camp, the rain began, a gentle patter on the leaves above that gradually increased to a steady downpour. The sound was soothing, creating a private world defined by the rhythm of falling water. Kaylin prepared a small meal from their supplies while Lyra arranged the sleeping area, carefully placing the thermal blanket to maximize warmth in the cool evening air. As they ate, sitting side by side in their shelter, Kaylin felt a strange sense of peace despite their precarious situation. There was something primal and right about this. Two beings sharing food and safety in a wild place, united against common dangers. After the meal, Kaylin retrieved his tablet, its soft glow illuminating their shelter. He opened the drawing program they'd been using to communicate and sketched a simple question mark beside an image of Lyra. She understood immediately, taking the tablet from him. Her drawings were becoming more sophisticated as she grew accustomed to the interface. She sketched a facility, clinical and sterile, with chambers containing winged figures at various stages of development. Then humans in lab coats observing, measuring, testing. The story she told through images was clear enough. Project Ascendant had created her kind, combining human and avian genetics to produce beings with enhanced capabilities. The purpose wasn't immediately evident until Lyra added images of her kind in military contexts: aerial reconnaissance, infiltration, combat. Weapons. They had been designed as weapons. But then came images of chaos, fire, destruction, the shift Kaylin realized. The collapse of the old governments, the rise of the corporations, the fragmentation of society. In the turmoil, some of Lyra's kind had escaped. She drew groups of winged figures living in remote areas, building their own community. Then darker images. Nexus troops discovering them, capturing some, killing others. Lyra herself fleeing, wounded, seeking refuge. The final image was simple but powerful. Lyra perched outside Kaylin's window, watching him, hoping for help. "How many of you are left?" Kaylin asked, his voice hushed in the enclosed space. Lyra held up 7 fingers, then hesitated and lowered 2. 5 confirmed survivors, 2 uncertain. "And the others, they're at this place we're going to?" "In the Dead Peaks." She nodded, adding a sketch of a mountain complex with the 5 figures sheltered within. Kaylin absorbed this information, feeling the weight of what she'd shared. Lyra and her kind were refugees from humanity's past mistakes, trying to build a future while being hunted for the genetic secrets they embodied. "Thank you," he said simply, "for trusting me with this." Lyra's response was unexpected. She leaned forward and, with ethereal gentleness, pressed her forehead against his, a gesture of profound connection. Her skin was warm against his, her breath a soft whisper. Kalen remained still, aware of the privilege being granted. When she pulled back, her amber eyes held his, a universe of unspoken communication passing between them. Outside their shelter, the rain continued its steady rhythm, masking them from the world that sought them. Inside, a different kind of barrier had fallen, one of understanding and acceptance that transcended the need for words. Kalen woke before dawn, disoriented momentarily by the unfamiliar surroundings. The rain had stopped during the night, leaving a profound stillness broken only by occasional droplets falling from the canopy above. He was warm despite the cool morning air, and it took him a moment to realize why. Lyra had extended one wing over him as he slept, the membrane trapping their shared body heat like a living blanket. She was already awake, watching him with those intelligent eyes that seemed to see more than his surface. When she noticed his consciousness, she withdrew her wing with a soft chirp that might have been embarrassment or simply acknowledgement. "Thank you," Kalen said, sitting up. "That was kind of you." They prepared quickly, sharing a brief meal before continuing their journey. The morning revealed the full beauty of their surroundings, the ancient forest glistening with raindrops that caught the early light. In another life, Kalen might have stopped to collect samples to analyze the remarkable resilience of this ecosystem. Now, such scientific curiosity seemed trivial compared to the more immediate concerns of survival. Lyra took to the air briefly, soaring above the canopy to scout their route. She returned with news conveyed through rapid sketches on the tablet. They were still on course, but she had spotted what might be a drone in the distance, moving in a search pattern. "Nexus," Kalen confirmed grimly. "They're not giving up easily." They traveled with increased caution, alternating between flight when the terrain allowed and ground movement when cover was necessary. Lyra's wound continued to improve, her strength returning gradually, but Kalen insisted on frequent rest periods. The dead peaks loomed closer now, their jagged silhouettes dominating the eastern horizon. By midday, they had reached the first true inclines of the mountain range. The vegetation changed, becoming sparser and hardier, clinging to rocky slopes with tenacious determination. The air was cooler here, carrying the mineral scent of the heights. They paused in the shelter of a rock formation to consult Kalen's maps. According to Alara's information, the settlement should be located near an abandoned mining complex in a valley between two of the major peaks. The approach would be the most dangerous part, exposed slopes offering little cover. As they were planning their route, a sound reached them, faint but unmistakable, the whirring of mechanical rotors. Drones, and closer than they'd anticipated. Lyra reacted instantly, pulling Kalen deeper into the shadow of the rocks. They pressed themselves against the cool stone, barely breathing as the sound grew louder. 3 drones appeared over the ridge they had just traversed, sleek, black machines with multiple sensor arrays. These weren't research station security models, but military-grade hunters, designed specifically for tracking and, if the weapon's mounts were any indication, elimination. Nexus wasn't just searching for them. They had deployed kill teams. The drones moved in a coordinated search pattern, systematically scanning the terrain. The therm block would mask their body heat, but the compound wasn't perfect. Prolonged, focus scans might still detect them. For long, tense minutes, they remained motionless as the drones quartered the area. One passed directly overhead, so close that Kalen could see the corporate logo emblazoned on its underside. Then, apparently detecting nothing of interest, the machines continued over the next ridge, their sound gradually fading. Lyra released a breath she'd been holding, her relief palpable. But the moment of safety was short-lived. From beyond the ridge came a new sound, the deeper thrum of larger engines. A transport, Kalen realized. The drones were merely the advanced scouts for a more substantial force. "We need to move now," he urged, grabbing their pack. "They're closing in." Lyra nodded grimly. Without hesitation, she gathered Kalen in her arms and launched them skyward, powerful wings driving them up the mountainside rather than across the exposed lower slopes. It was a riskier approach. They would be visible against the sky, but it offered the only chance of outpacing their pursuers. They climbed rapidly, Lyra pushing herself to the limits of her impressive endurance. Kaelin could feel the strain in her body, the slight trembling of overtaxed muscles, but she didn't falter. Below and behind them, the transport came into view, a sleek, armored vehicle designed for wasteland travel, bearing the unmistakable insignia of Nexus security. They had nearly reached the ridgeline when disaster struck. A drone, previously unseen, rose suddenly from the far side of the ridge. There was no time to change course, no cover to seek. The machine's sensors fixed on them instantly, lights flashing as it transmitted their position. Lyra reacted with astounding speed and decision. With a powerful surge of her wings, she hurled them over the ridgeline, then banked sharply downward into the valley beyond. The maneuver was so abrupt that Kaelin nearly lost his grip, his stomach lurching with the sudden change in direction. The drone followed, but Lyra's aerial agility far exceeded its programmed capabilities. She weaved between rocky outcroppings, used updrafts to gain altitude, then dropped suddenly into narrow ravines, all while maintaining her grip on Kaelin with unwavering strength. The valley opened before them, a vast, bowl-shaped depression nestled between the peaks. At its center stood the remains of the mining complex, a collection of weathered structures built into the mountainside itself. But something was wrong. The place appeared abandoned, showing no signs of the settlement Alara had described. No movement, no smoke from fires, no indication of habitation. Lyra faltered momentarily, her confusion evident. Then determination returned to her features. She adjusted their course toward a particular structure, larger than the others, with a flat roof that could serve as a landing platform. Behind them, the drone continued its pursuit, now joined by two others rising from the transport that had rounded the mountain base. The hunters were closing in. Lyra landed heavily on the roof, setting Kaelin down with unusual haste. She pointed urgently toward a door that led into the building, then turned to face their pursuers, wings spread in what could only be described as a defensive posture. "What are you doing?" Kaelin demanded, grabbing her arm. "We need to hide, both of us." Lyra shook her head firmly. She pointed to Kaelin, then to the door, her meaning clear. "You go in. I'll draw them away." "No." Kaelin refused, his grip tightening. "I'm not leaving you to face them alone." The drones were visible now, rapidly approaching across the valley. They had minutes at most before the machines would be upon them. Lyra's expression softened for a moment. She touched Kaelin's face gently, the gesture conveying what words could not. Then, with surprising strength, she pushed him toward the door and prepared to launch herself back into the air. Before she could do so, the door burst open. Two figures emerged onto the roof. One human, one winged like Lyra, but with darker coloration and a more compact build. They assessed the situation in an instant. "Inside, both of you," the human figure commanded, raising what appeared to be a repurposed military weapon toward the approaching drones. "Now!" Lyra's expression transformed with sudden recognition and joy. She chirped loudly, a sound of greeting or relief, and grabbed Kaelin's hand, pulling him toward the door. The other wing being moved to assist the human, taking up a defensive position with its own weapon. They rushed through the door, which closed heavily behind them. Inside, the building was surprisingly well maintained, not the abandoned ruin it appeared from outside. Lights glowed from recessed fixtures, and the air hummed with functioning machinery. Maintenance access shaft, level 3, a voice instructed from hidden speakers. Emergency protocol 7 active. Move quickly. Lyra seemed to understand, leading Kaelin through a series of corridors to a vertical shaft fitted with a ladder. They descended rapidly, the sounds of conflict above them growing fainter with each level they passed. Level 3 opened into a large chamber that appeared to be a control center of sorts. Screens displayed various sectors of the complex, including the roof they had just fled. The human and winged being were retreating now, having apparently disabled at least one of the drones. The others maintained pursuit, weapons visible on their undersides. A figure rose from a console at the center of the room, a woman with close-cropped silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. She assessed them quickly, her gaze lingering on Lyra's wounded side. "Lyra, we feared the worst when you didn't return with the others." Her voice was crisp, but not unkind. She turned to Kaelin. "And you must be the researcher she went back for." "Kaelin, is it?" Kaelin stared in confusion. "How do you know my name? And what do you mean, went back for?" The woman gestured toward a seating area to one side of the control center. "We have little time for explanations, but you deserve some. I am Commander Varys. This facility, we call it Haven, has been a sanctuary for Lyra's kind for nearly 5 years. We monitor all Nexus communications and became aware of your correspondence with a certain Alara. When Lyra learned you might be receptive to contact, she volunteered to attempt communication." "Wait," Kaelin interrupted, looking between Varys and Lyra. "You mean her appearance at my window wasn't random? It was planned?" Lyra nodded, her expression apologetic yet resolute. She took the tablet from their pack and quickly sketched, herself observing Kaelin from a distance, then the decision to approach his window directly. "We needed to know if you could be trusted," Varys continued. "Lyra assessed that you could be, but then she was wounded during a Nexus patrol encounter. When she didn't return, we assumed the worst. I'm glad to see her judgment of your character was accurate." Before Kaelin could process this revelation, alarms sounded throughout the facility. One of the screens showed the transport vehicle arriving at the base of the complex, troops in Nexus tactical gear deploying in formation. "They found us faster than anticipated," Varys noted grimly. "The settlement has been compromised. Evacuation protocol is already in progress." Indeed, Kaelin now noticed the efficient activity throughout the visible sections of the facility, people packing essential supplies, securing equipment, moving with the discipline of those who had practiced for this eventuality. "Where will you go?" he asked. "We have contingency locations," Varys replied, watching the screens intently. "But Nexus is becoming more persistent. This is the 3rd relocation in 2 years." One of the screens showed the defenders from the roof entering the facility through a secondary access point, having successfully evaded the drones. The winged being immediately crossed to Lyra, embracing her with obvious relief. Their chirps and calls created a musical exchange that needed no translation. Family reunited. Varys turned to Kaelin with sudden intensity. "You have a choice to make, researcher. Your presence here is no accident. Lyra believed you possessed knowledge that could help us. Technical skills we need, but staying means committing fully to our cause. Nexus doesn't forgive those who aid the Project Ascendant assets, as they call them." "What is your cause exactly?" Kaelin asked, though in his heart, he already knew his decision. "Freedom," Varys said simply. "The right of Lyra and her kind to exist without being hunted, experimented on, or weaponized. And eventually, perhaps, a world where the barriers between human and non-human intelligence become less rigid, where difference isn't feared but valued." Lyra approached Kaelin then, standing tall despite her exhaustion and injury. She extended her hand as she had before their flight from the research station, that deliberately human gesture of partnership and trust. There was no hesitation this time. Kaelin took her hand, feeling the now familiar texture of her skin, the strength in her grip that could be gentle when needed. "I'm with you, whatever comes next." Lyra's expression brightened, the patterns on her skin shifting in what Kaelin now recognized as joy. She chirped softly, a sound he was beginning to think might be his name in her language. Commander Varys nodded with approval. "Then welcome to Haven, Kaelin, or what's left of it. We evacuate in 20 minutes. Gather only what's essential." As the facility mobilized around them, Lyra led Kaelin to a quiet alcove away from the immediate activity. There, with careful movements, she removed something from a hidden pocket near her wing joint, a small device that, when activated, projected a holographic interface. Through this, she was able to communicate more effectively than their tablet sketches had allowed. Her first message appeared in glowing text. "Asterisk, I am sorry for deceiving you initially. The risk was necessary. Thank you for helping despite the danger. Asterisk. You don't need to apologize, Kaelin replied, touched by her concern. I understand why you had to be cautious. Her next message was more personal. Asterisk, you could have closed the window that first night. Instead, you opened your door. Not just the physical door. Asterisk. Kaelin smiled, remembering his fear that first night. How alien and threatening she had seemed perched outside his window with her labored breathing. Now, looking at her, he saw only Lyra. Unique, remarkable, but no longer alien. I'm glad I did, he said simply. Around them, the evacuation continued with practiced efficiency. Through the control room screens, they could see Nexus forces establishing a perimeter around the complex, preparing for what they doubtlessly expected to be a standard containment operation. They were in for a surprise. Haven's defenders had been preparing for this day far longer than Nexus realized. Lyra's final message before they joined the evacuation summed up their shared journey and the path ahead. Asterisk, no more windows between us. Only open sky. Asterisk, as they moved toward the future, uncertain, dangerous, but faced together, Kaelin knew with absolute certainty that he had made the right choice. The winged Beastwoman who had once perched outside his window, breathing heavily, had led him not to danger, but to freedom. His own, as much as hers.